Hi there, this is Philip from Beyond the Tabletop. In this video we're carrying on with the Gorgon project, this time assembling the main hull. Here are all the parts that we left from the last video. If you haven't seen that yet, please check the link in the top right hand corner now. If we quickly just look at the instructions, it talks about adding in the rear door, making sure not to glue it in at the hinges, and then you need to add in that left gun position followed by the hole. And that's what we're going to do now. So the best way I found to assemble these pieces together is to have the ramp attached to this side while having the ramp door open rather than closed, because actually when it's closed it's much more difficult to get all the pieces to fit together. Then it's a bit of a jiggle to try and lock this piece in like so, but while having the door also in there. And remember, this bit you won't want to be gluing because you'll want that free. And then that's this section all joined up together. Now with that section all fitted in place, this door can close up and it will help join the sections together. If we just bring it around to the front section, you can have a look in and see what it looks like all completed. Then it's just a matter of adding in that floor. So if I bring in the floor, you need to make sure it snaps into place. Sometimes you'll notice, for example, just on this left hand side, that column isn't meeting the floor. That's because this needs to come back slightly. And then there you go, it clicks into place, and then that's the position that it will need to be in. So all I did is I heated this up with a heat gun. A hairdryer is a good alternative if you don't have a heat gun. And then all I did is I just carefully adjusted it to the right, so now this side is no longer rubbing. So if I just open and close it, you can now see it opens and closes really well, and you've got that nice magnet sound where it holds it in place. Before I carry on with the next step, what I want to do is mask off the areas below that I've painted. So I want to just mask up this whole section with some Tamiya tape, similar to the way I've done the cabin up top. Now with the rear ramp closed, this section should be relatively straightforward to paint up and not require any masking. However, you can just see there's a very small gap either side. So what I want to do is open this up, and I'm just going to carefully add some tape along the hazard stripe and along this ramp side. That should still allow me to close the door, but just protect those areas from any excess paint which might come through those gaps. I've gone away and I've now masked off the areas of the back. For the front section I've used a variety of width sizes, mostly so I can get into these recesses just here and along where this bracket is. And then I've used much larger pieces to span across just to seal that door in. I've left a small part of the floor still visible. I'm hoping that in doing so I should be able to create a good transition between the unpainted part and the part that's already been painted. For the rear section I've gone all the way along the sides and top section of the ramp, along with the corresponding internal area, so along here and here, covering the hazard stripes, and then along this top section here, also covering the hazard stripe. With the ramp now closed, hopefully all that bit will now be protected. With that all done, let's look at the next step of the instructions. We need to add in the main side piece along with the inner door, which can be pivotable if it's not glued in. And then also there's the right hand piece, and then there's the top panel which joins the two sides together at the front. The thing to take note of is this inner door. What I want to do is magnetize it in the same way as the rear door. I've got my two side pieces and I've got my inner ramp. This is the external side, this will be the internal side. This is the left hand side. So it should just be a matter of mounting it in like so, and then that will keep it in place. You can see that there's a tiny little recess and there's a little notch. That's so when this is in place, that should actually just be able to slightly lock in place. Now that's going to wear and rub over time, so I want to replace this with a magnet, and again I want to replace this section here with a magnet as well. So it should be relatively straightforward because this time it's all marked out for me, whereas it wasn't on the rear ramp. What I'll do at the same time is also sand these sides down ever so slightly That's because I don't want them to rub against the sides just here when the ramp is closed, because just like the ramp at the rear, any kind of contact between these surfaces will cause the paint to come off. So I've added in the magnets into both side pieces of the hull and adding it to both sides of the front internal ramp. I use the exact same magnets as the rear ramp, which was 2mm, and then carefully using a 2mm drill just to make the hole. With that all now done, you can just do a test fit just to make sure it fits together, and that will now keep that in place. So taking our main piece and the right hand side, you can see that there's a ridge there where the floor goes, and then there's an indent here just where this gun position will mount up. So it'll be just a matter of gluing in place, just like that. And then to reduce that gap, I will just need to hold it in place until the unit is all glued together. I've now got this side piece all glued in. I've just green stuffed along the gaps. There was quite a noticeable gap along these two walls just here. You can also see the floor is just dipping down slightly, so I've just extended those two buttresses with a bit of green stuff. With that in place, the next step is to add in the front internal ramp, not gluing it in, remember. Then to add in the other side along with a top piece. At this stage I would suggest doing a dry fit of all of those pieces before gluing them in, just to make sure there's nothing vastly wrong, and potentially using your heat gun just to bend a few bits of resin into place so it's much easier to glue. So getting all the pieces that I need, I can add in the front ramp. Then I just need to locate that first before I can add in the side. And then I can add this top piece in. I've just added some elastic bands to hold it in place to make it easier to show you. What you need to do is make sure that there's no real gap here when you've applied some pressure, because that bit needs to fit in really nicely. And then also you want to make sure that there's no gaps here, or ideally along this front. You can see that I've added in some extra green stuff just to these two pieces on the front. I just wanted to fill them out a little bit more, so once this piece is glued in I can just sand them all down together to get a really nice flat finish. You also want to make sure that your ramp isn't rubbing against the two sides, because you don't want any paints to be coming off. So I think that looks pretty good. If we do a top-down look, you can see there's a bit of a gap between the floor and the wall. That's because I had overly sanded the floor down when I was trying to get to the edge as flush as possible. So I was aware that would be a bit of an issue, but that's not too much of a problem because I can just green stuff that. What I'm more concerned about is there's a much bigger gap along here. If I just remove that top panel for a second, you can see it a bit more clearly. The gap between the ramp and the floor is definitely getting much wider towards the bottom. That's causing me a bit of concern. If I had realised that earlier, I could have made sure that the floor was completely square, so if there was a gap, at least it would be consistent all the way along. Now, I could just leave it as it is, because it's only ever going to really be noticeable from this top-down position. At any other angle, you won't ever really notice it. However, what I'm going to do is just add a small bit of green stuff to that floor, let it dry, and then I can sand it to the right shape. Once that's done, I can do another test fit just to make sure it all looks okay. I've gone away and added in some green stuff just to that floor. I'm still doing a dry fit for the ramp and the other side, and you can see now that that gap is a lot more even throughout. Now, before I glue this side in place, there's a few things I want to do that will just make my life a bit easier when it comes to painting, and that's just to prime a few areas which will be really hard to reach once this side is added in. As you can see down here, there's a lot of these alcoves, and trying to prime the corners and the underside will be much more difficult once it's all attached. So what I'm going to do is just prime these sections here along with these undercuts just along the top. I'm also going to do the same on this side, and also just prime that slight underside of the cab just there. That will be really hard to do once this side's been added in, but it will still potentially be visible from the front section. This section here has a lot of detail, but I think I can get away with priming all of that once it's glued in place because it's quite near the front. So I'm just going to go away and do that now, and then I'll be back in a minute. I've now finished the undershading on the two parts of the Gorgon. As you can see here, I've concentrated on this top section and where there's the alcove. I've also gone into all the other tiny strips and panels, and I've also done that on here as well. If you look from below, all the undersides are painted, but if you look from the top, there's still a lot of unpainted areas. That will all be tidied up once the kit is assembled, and then I will do a proper undercoat on the rest of the model. And it's the same story with the single side piece. All the top sections are slightly bare, but all the bottom sections are now painted. Once the kit is assembled and I've done my base coat, the base coat will have to be from a top-down position because I won't ever be able to get to the underside once the kit is built. So if there is any areas of black that will be visible, it will just create a natural shadow. What you don't want is any bare resin being visible from the model. That's quite likely to be the case, especially when you can look into the Gorgon from the front of the ramp and also through the rear entrance. So finally we can get on to the next step, which is adding in this ramp here. And then I just need to glue in the sides. Now for gluing in the side piece to the floor, I just need to make sure I put glue along here, along this whole section as well. And it's important to not get any glue just here because you want that ramp to be able to fold up and fold down. So just by adding in that piece there, like so, I've finished gluing in the side hole piece. I've now got all these pieces glued together. So I added in the front ramp, then I glued in the side hole piece, and then while this was still drying, I also glued in the front hole piece because this piece here gives a really good alignment for the front of this side hole piece, and it just means everything is lined up correctly. So I also had to make sure that this floor was really level. It sort of looks like it isn't, but it's an optical illusion due to the green stuff, because what I didn't want to happen was the floor position to be slightly off, and by having this in and holding it in place I can make sure everything was aligned correctly. With that now all glued in, I made sure I green stuffed this large gap that was here, along with the slightly smaller gap along the floor, and then also just extending out those two buttresses with some green stuff just to make sure that they meet the floor, because there was a bit of a gap there as well. I've also gone and just green stuffed the seam line along the front hole, along with the front section just here. Once the green stuff has dried, I'm going to sand this down super smooth, along with sanding down these two brackets along the top so they're in slightly better alignment. I'll also be sanding down this seam line and this seam line just to make sure it looks like one large piece of metal. If I put that aside to 1 second, you can see that we've now completed the top row of this page of instructions, and then the next section is focusing on the assault ram, which I'll cover in the next video. That's all for now. As always, I hope you've enjoyed that video. Feel free to drop me a comment below, and if you want to stay notified about the next video, make sure you're subscribed. Until the next time, take care.